Hello everybody. Welcome back to another video. Grab your water, your coffee, your tea, your glass of wine, whatever alcoholic beverage you might want, whatever beverage in general. And let's sit down and chat a little bit about the PhD admission process in clinical psychology. So I'm so glad that you all are here to chat and want to learn more about what it's like to actually apply to a PhD program in clinical psychology. I actually find this to be such valuable information, given that you don't really get access to this information unless you're part of some sort of program, like a McNair Scholars Program like I was, that really supported undergraduate students looking to get a doctorate degree, or if you have friends or even family members who have gone through that process. And of course you have the good old internet, but there's a lot of unanswered questions that we all might have throughout this process, and I figured that I'd talk a little bit about some of them here. So first thing is, you want to be sure that you're finding a list of schools that you'd like to apply to, right? So that's the obvious. But even taking a step back from that, you want to ask yourself a couple of questions when you're selecting your schools. You want to ask yourself, does this school offer the experiences that I'd like to get throughout this program and as a graduate student there? Do they have research advisors and research labs that are doing exactly what I'd like to do in graduate school, that could also help me take my career to the next level and do that as a professional? Oh, and of course we have a special guest, so lots of noise in the background. I figured I'd switch up the environment, but anyway. So you want to ask yourself questions like that. Is this school going to be the appropriate stepping stone to help me get to where I want to be long-term in my career? So when you're doing that research and you're sort of looking through the programs, you want to take a look at the current faculty, the doctoral faculty that are currently a part of the PhD program that you're looking at or thinking about applying to. And you want to see the current research that they're involved in. It's usually not an exhaustive list, meaning that it doesn't necessarily list every single research topic that they're interested in or every single research project that they have done, but usually they do a good job of briefly summarizing that. And then keep in mind that if your interests fall within the umbrella of what they're researching, you might have the agency to be able to do some of that independent work and get a little bit more specific down to the kernel of what you want to do and what you want to research. So those are some things that you might want to ask specifically while you're on your interview. I think one thing that I really want to be sure to emphasize is that a big part of this PhD application process is about fit. And people say that a lot, and they throw that word around a lot, but what it really means is that ensuring that what the faculty member researches and does at that program directly aligns with work that you have done and want to do in the future, during your time with them as well as in your career. And that needs to be clear, very clear from your materials, as well as come across very clearly during your interview, if you are able to interview at that specific site. So once you've gone through and you've taken a look at the potential research opportunities that are available for you and that you could potentially be involved in, the next step that you want to do is look specifically at the faculty members who are accepting students for that PhD admission cycle. The last thing that you want to do is apply to a faculty member's lab who is either on sabbatical or they're no longer taking graduate students for that year. And some ways to figure out whether faculty members are accepting students for that upcoming PhD application cycle is to simply email them. Sometimes it's listed on the website where you're able to clearly see, yes, this faculty member is accepting students, yes, this faculty member is not. But you can go ahead and send them an email. I have done this myself throughout this process. When I applied twice, and the second time I was able to get interviews and actually successfully get acceptances. So I went ahead and I sent an email. I just briefly introduced myself. I explained what my research interests are and how they directly align with them. I've even attached my CV, for example. And then I simply just asked them, I expressed interest in their lab and that I anticipate applying to their program specifically to work with them. And I'm just curious to know if you're interested in, or if you're accepting students for this upcoming PhD cycle. That's totally acceptable and kind of expected during that PhD application cycle, that they're going to be receiving emails from students just to make sure students are making an informed decision to know that, you know, this is potentially a program that I'd like to attend if I'm offered an admission or an acceptance offer. So what you've done so far is that you've researched the specific schools that you're interested in. You've narrowed it down to the specific faculty members that you'd be potentially interested in working with. And you might have sent some emails just to get some clarifying information to make sure that you're making an informed decision when you're paying for these applications, and when you're sort of putting all your time and effort and working hard to curate strong, you know, graduate application materials to apply to that program. When applying to graduate schools in clinical psychology, there are several materials that go in and make up your application. So one being your CV, your curriculum vitae. And what that is a lengthy academic resume, if you will, that sort of highlights all your professional and academic achievements that you have accomplished from college to the current point in which that you're applying to. So that would include, you know, your education information, any master's thesis that you have completed, master's degrees that you've completed as well, and so forth. Then you'd also include your clinical work. Now, I recognize that it's really, really hard to get clinical work at, you know, at an undergraduate level, but even also a post-undergraduate level. Unless you have a master's in clinical psychology, then you might be able to really do some, you know, graduate level work, therapy work, by providing therapeutic services that you could speak to on your interview, as well as your personal statement. Whew, I feel like I'm out of breath because I was just chasing Remy because she was crying. Bear with me. And in your CV, you'd also want to include any research experience that you have had. So listing specifically the research labs that you've been involved in, what you have gained from those experiences, what specific deliverables. So were there any, you know, presentations, like poster presentations, conferences, you know, that you attended, publications, things like that. And you'd also want to include that in your resume as well. Maybe in another video, I could talk very specifically about each component and how to craft one. I'd be curious to know if that's something that you all might find helpful. I'd imagine you would. So just let me know and I'm happy to do that too. You also want to include a personal statement. So that personal statement usually describes who you are, where you're coming from, and where you'd like to go, very, you know, broadly speaking. But in the essay, you want to get very specific and talk about maybe some pivotal moments in your life that have really influenced your decision to become a psychologist. And so talking about that and talking about the experiences that you have, you know, gained that will well prepare you to be a graduate student at the PhD level in clinical psychology, and also how the program can be a good stepping stone to get you to where you want to be. Some programs might request additional or supplemental essays. So that could be like a diversity statement. It could also include maybe prior, like a couple of years ago, you know, the GRE was required, which I'll get into that in a little bit. And so oftentimes they would give you the opportunity to write an essay talking about any pitfalls that you might have or gaps in your materials that you want to elaborate on to prove that, you know, while I have this, you know, downfall in my materials, here's why I'm still qualified and capable of, you know, doing graduate level work. And while you're crafting these materials, you really want to make sure that you have enough trusted eyes looking over these materials to give you feedback, to highlight any inconsistencies or things that might not flow, spelling errors, grammatical errors. Those are things that you really want to be sure that you're picking up before you're finally submitting your application materials. There's also a resource that all of us, I would argue, have used throughout our application process. It's like Mitch's uncovered like tips and resources for applying to PhD programs in clinical psychology. That's really helpful. It's like a free PDF online that you could Google and have access to. I'll go ahead and also include it in the description box so that this video just has everything that you might need. Another thing that I did not mention that I think is really important to talk about is as you're thinking about the schools that you want to apply to, you also want to ensure that they're APA accredited. So meaning that they're accredited by the governing body that, you know, essentially sort of supports all these psychological programs and associations and groups and things like that. So you could, of course, read more about it. There's a whole website out there where you can get access to a lot of resources from organizations, so like you could be a part of divisions, clubs, so forth and so forth. You could just find a whole lot there. But the reason being is that you want to make sure they're APA accredited because that is a requirement for licensure across states, right? So when you're accredited by the APA, that means that you are following a specific guideline and standard to ensure that all programs are accurately and like appropriately preparing students to be competent clinical psychologists. And if you don't have that governing body accreditation, then technically programs can do whatever they want. They could remove certain courses that are really important to get a depth of understanding and knowledge on. It would save you a lot if you're, you know, just applying to APA accredited programs. I know people think differently on this. My thing is better safe than sorry, and I want to ensure that I'm going through this program, that I'm spending a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money, and getting top-notch education, essentially, and having no hiccups for accreditation or, excuse me, licensure down the road. So the last piece is talking about the GRE, the Graduate Record Examination. So as of 2020, most programs are no longer requiring the GRE, largely because of the inequalities that are rooted in standardized testing, lack of access to resources for individuals to do well on those exams. The cost of it, I believe, oh goodness, when I took it, it was, I believe, $205 or $250 to take the exam. And I did take the test multiple times. So that was, you know, multiply that by how many ever times you took it, plus the amount of money it costs to send your scores. So you could send up to 5, I think it was, at the time that you receive your scores, you know, right after you finish the test. And then after each one, I think it was like $27 or something like that. And then that doesn't, of course, include the resources, the money that goes into buying the test materials to prepare, maybe even having a tutor and so forth and so forth. So it's just a costly exam. And so that is no longer being required, especially in 2020 when there was the pandemic, the financial hardship, and then finally schools across the board are kind of recognizing or acknowledging the inequalities rooted in that. So along with the GRE, it was also the psych subject GRE, which used to be required for folks who were not psychology majors. Now that is also optional from my understanding. I do believe that this is a program by program decision and not necessarily a standard decision across the board that has been like this, again, uniform decision. But I would just encourage you to look at the program that you're applying to, look at what is required and go from there. So that's all I really want to say about the GRE, just because it's so up in the air. But again, happy to talk about my GRE experience if that's helpful. So that is just a brief overview of the preparation needed when applying to PhD programs in clinical psychology. And I hope you all found this video helpful. And I'm happy, like I said, again, to go into depth about these specific application materials like a CV, personal statement, and so forth and so forth. And even preparing for interviews, if that's helpful to you all, just let me know and I'd be happy to talk a little bit about that. And if you have any questions about my specific experience or anything I didn't cover, just let me know and I'd be happy to answer your questions down below. So best of luck when applying to PhD programs. Wish you all the best.